Men who slept with married women, what pushed you? And how did you feel? Did you feel any regret at all for the other person's partner? I was tricked into sleeping with a girl who was still in a relationship. The knowing part came after the deed, but here's the history. I had been texting this girl for over a year. She told me she dumped her boyfriend and started sending me explicit pictures of herself. We eventually met up, and we had a lot of amazing banging sessions. She seemed to really enjoy it too. After about a week of great, carefree banging, she suddenly decided that we weren't meant to be. Naturally, I was a little upset, but I moved on. Then, the second part came. My best friend is friends with her best friend, and I found out that not only had she never actually broken up with her boyfriend, but he had been driving her to see me multiple times. The kicker? She'd reported everything that happened between us to her best friend. Later on, I saw all the texts she'd sent, where she was talking about how I had a huge dong and how I performed like I had 10 years of experience, while claiming her boyfriend could never compare. But even though she said all of this, she couldn't bring herself to break up with him. It was a real blow to my ego. The lengths some people will go to just to cheat are pretty unbelievable. Story 2. When I was 19, I met a 34-year-old woman off a dating app. I was inexperienced and she was my first kiss, and I lost my V-card to her. At first everything was great. However, not long after, I found out she was actually married and had a daughter. Unfortunately, she convinced me that she was in an open relationship and that her husband knows everything. We kept hooking up for about another month until one night when we were to meet, she was running late, so I called. She got mad that I tried calling her, and she mentioned her husband was being nosy, but I didn't think much of it. After this incident, I discovered she was separating from her husband, and that's when I figured he found out, and what she told me earlier was a lie. I of course feel extremely guilty, because I can't stop thinking that I am the reason a little girl out there is growing up without her father. Looking back, all the signs were there. We never met at her house. Only motels and her car. We would hook up at weird hours, either during working hours, when I was supposed to be in school, or late at night. I was such an idiot to not see the signs. Story 3. It's a story from my past. I reconnected with a girl I hadn't spoken to in about 10 years. When we started talking again, she was 24 or 25. I admitted to her that back when we were young, I had always wanted to be with her, but I was shy, so I never said anything. To my surprise, she admitted she felt the same way but was also too shy to express it. At one point, she asked if she could come over to my place. She was in a relationship, but she told me her boyfriend wasn't satisfying her as much anymore. They used to be very active, but it had dwindled down to only about once a month, and she wasn't happy with that. Our time together was amazing, and it ended up being one of the best one in my life. We met up twice, but after the second time, I told her we should stop. I didn't want to get too attached or jealous of her having a boyfriend, and I didn't want to be in a situation where I was the third wheel. Interestingly, her boyfriend was somewhat aware of what was going on. He had given her permission to be with other people, as long as he didn't know about it or hear about it. It didn't affect their relationship, though, as they're still together 5 years later and even moved to another country together. Looking back, I don't regret it. It allowed me to live out a childhood fantasy, and it all worked out in the end. Everyone is happy, and no relationships were damaged. Story 4. I ended up sleeping with a married coworker. After less than 2 weeks, he told me he loved me. Before that, I had gone back and forth with myself about whether or not I should tell his wife, especially considering the guy had a lot of issues I wasn't attracted to, drugs, a personality my family would never approve of, and more. He made all the first moves. I liked him, but I never planned on anything happening until he started making advances toward me. He told me he was in love with me, that he wanted to leave his wife, and that he was going to. It was clear there were problems in his marriage, and even our other coworkers noticed, so I convinced myself that everything would work out if he divorced her. No one would have to get hurt because she would never find out about the affair. Even though he was the one to initiate everything, I'm not without fault. I allowed it to continue for almost 2 years before I finally told his wife anonymously. She had her suspicions and eventually figured out it was me, and things spiraled from there. I thought I was in love with him, but deep down I knew he was just manipulating me the entire time. Honestly, I think I knew it from the start, even if I didn't want to admit it. I think the wife initially wanted a divorce, and they may have even filed for it, but I don't think they ever went through with it. At this point, it doesn't really matter. I regret it more than anything else in my life, and I never want to find myself in that kind of situation again. I hope I can eventually find someone who truly loves me, without all the deceit and pain. Story 5. I was in Tampa for a wedding and ended up hooking up with one of the guests. She was older and married, 44 at the time, though she looked much younger and had an incredible, fit body. I was 32, and we really hit it off. The chemistry was intense, and we ended up spending some private time together. Everything was going great until I realized the guy she was with was actually her husband. I started to get nervous, thinking I'd crossed a line. But then she dropped the bombshell that they were in an open marriage. They had 2 homes, one for him and one for her. It turned out that this whole situation wasn't what I'd expected at all. I ended up spending the rest of the weekend with her, and it was a mix of fun and wild moments. Honestly, I might have felt guilty if the whole situation wasn't so laid back and open between all parties involved. Her husband was cool with everything, so I didn't feel too bad. I just chalked it up to being a wild wedding weekend experience. It felt like one of those stories that only happen when you're in the right place at the right time. The funny part, we've actually met up every time I visit my friends in Florida. The whole experience opened my eyes to a different kind of lifestyle, and I have to say Florida has a unique vibe about it. Definitely not your average wedding weekend. Story 6. I'm trans, and for a long time, I felt like I'd never be able to have a normal relationship with anyone. My first experiences, starting as young as 18, were always with married men or men with girlfriends. I lost my V-card to a friend's boyfriend, which still haunts me. These encounters were always in the dark, in cars, and it always felt awful, but it was the only affection I could get at the time. As I transitioned and became more confident in my appearance, that mindset stuck with me. I grew distrustful of men because of those early experiences, so I never really pursued relationships, even when their behavior toward me started to change. I was too afraid of karma and what men might do. Now, I'm in a relationship with a boyfriend who lives with me, but I feel so paranoid and fearful all the time, especially since he spent some time talking to other women online. I can't help but feel like there's no point in him staying with me because of my character flaws and what I perceive as being abnormal about me. It just makes sense to me that at some point, he'd leave for someone more normal without all this baggage. And that thought, in turn, leads me to worry that he'd end up cheating, just like the others before him did. It doesn't feel good to be constantly in that mindset. I feel guilty for the attention I've received in the past and the things I did just to feel affection or less lonely. And I hate thinking about the people I hurt along the way. There was a time when I was just so angry about what others had that I didn't, and it pushed me to act in ways that didn't help me in the long run. In the end, I never felt better. Now, I'm angry before I even have a reason to be, and it's a constant struggle. Story 7. 25 years ago, there was this girl in my neighborhood. We were the same age and in the same grade in high school, but we didn't hang out much. We both went to different colleges, and eventually, she started dating a friend of mine. They had a child together, and over the next few years, I saw my friend quite often, so she was around too. Their relationship wasn't healthy. He was a toxic, narcissistic guy, and while she was incredibly smart, she was insecure. I didn't fully understand it back then, but he was mentally abusive towards her. Around the age of 22, both of us had what you'd call glow-ups. She became incredibly attractive and gained back her confidence, while I developed a more toned physique and started getting attention from girls. The 3 of us, me, my friend, and her, used to go out every Friday night once we turned 21. As their relationship worsened, though, he started skipping out. I'd show up at their place, expecting him to come, but he'd always make up an excuse to stay in. He'd still encourage her and me to go out, and we'd usually meet up with other friends, so nothing felt off. Then one night, something just happened. She drove to my place so we could go out, and I drove us back to my place to grab her car afterward. We had fun with friends, but when we got to my place and I parked, I noticed her staring at me with this intense look. Before I knew it, we were making out in the front seat, and then things escalated. It was sudden and unexpected. We both enjoyed the moment, but we knew it was wrong. A couple of days later, she called me wanting to talk. I braced myself for the consequences of what had happened. When I arrived, my friend wasn't there, just her. She greeted me, then started removing her layers. We ended up sleeping together again, and this went on for several months. Before and after her, I've had relationships, some brief and others more meaningful, but nothing compared to the connection I had with her. The intimacy between us was like nothing I've ever experienced. She knew exactly how to touch me, what to say, and how to express desire. I felt the same about her. We were both aware it was wrong, but we couldn't stop. It became something of an addiction, an undeniable connection. Eventually, I realized it was getting worse, and that the fallout would be huge. So, I decided to move away for grad school, and we agreed to end things. She needed to resolve her marriage, and I needed to move on. However, she visited me twice afterward, driving 3 hours each time for quick encounters. Those visits taught us two things. First, while the intimacy was amazing, it wasn't a solid foundation for a future, and second, she was working on herself and knew she had to let go of me to fully move on from her toxic marriage. She eventually filed for divorce and went on to become a stripper to put herself through med school. This experience taught me a lot about relationships. I've never gone out with a married or involved woman since, even for something as simple as lunch. I've learned that while my involvement with her might not have had immediate consequences, it was wrong and hurt others. This experience shaped how I approach relationships today, and I'll never forget the lessons it taught me. Story 8. I've never slept with a married woman, but I came really close once. An old situationship reached out to me after years of no contact, asking if we could chat on Snapchat. I figured something must be off with her current relationship. She was engaged, but not yet married. She told me she was having second thoughts about marrying her fiancé, saying he didn't appreciate her, never made her feel sexy, and had a chronic pot-smoking habit that was interfering with other parts of their life. But she didn't want to break it off because she didn't want to disappoint everyone after all the time and energy her family had put into the wedding plans. We started reconnecting emotionally, which eventually led to flirting, and then she sent me her private pictures. We went for drinks, and things got so close to turning physical. But I had a moment of clarity and realized that no matter how bad their relationship was, I couldn't go through with it. She was very, very much DTF though. Even after I told her I couldn't do it, she begged me to hold her and tell her she was sexy. I also told her I couldn't be the person she left him for, because that would always make me question her loyalty. We stopped talking again, and they eventually got married. I have no idea how things are going now, but I had her on Facebook for all these years, and I honestly thought their relationship seemed solid. Guess you never really know. Story 9. I attended a party once and saw this one girl with her husband. Dude was insecure AF. He had her stand right beside him, and you could tell he was controlling too. I had attended that party with a girlfriend I had. I could tell the girl was meat-gazing. About a year later, we ended up working together. She started telling me how she was on an on and off relationship because her husband was nuts. She knew I had a girlfriend and witnessed several other girls bring me lunch or pick me up. Anyways, we started getting along, and she would complain about her husband and be flirtatious. I didn't want to get involved in any drama. One day, she was crying and said she needed a friend to talk to, so we drove out to a spot where we'd been with co-workers to hang out and drink. While we were talking, she started venting, and suddenly, she jumped to the back seat and pulled me back there. No joke, she made the move. We started hooking up every now and then, and she asked me to keep it a secret, which I thought was because of our co-workers. One day, I texted her, just casually, nothing inappropriate, just friendly. I guess her boyfriend had taken her phone, and when I texted, he thought it was her. He called me furious, threatening to harm me and hide me in a trunk. Honestly, I ended up sleeping with her a few more times, partly because of the way he came at me. Eventually, I ended up talking to her friend, who was completely different. Fast forward 15 years, and we're still together. Story 10. I live in Japan, and I think it's important to provide that context for what I'm about to share. The first time it happened, I had no idea until a few months into our arrangement. She eventually told me. I thought about leaving, but by that point, we had already hooked up several times, so I couldn't change the past. Plus, I was in a rough place at the time and needed this arrangement in my life. It turned out that this wasn't an isolated situation. It happened to me a few more times, and even some of my friends had similar experiences. I learned that foreign men in Japan are often sought after by women who want to cheat. The reasons are simple. We don't speak the local language, our social circles are separate, and most of us leave after a few years. This provides a lot of secrecy for women, and on top of that, they get the excitement of trying something new. One of my friends was in a serious relationship with a woman, but we later found out she had secretly been engaged to a Japanese man the whole time. Over time, I became more understanding of the situation. Most of these women are in relationships with partners who aren't interested in them physically, and many of the men they're with might be stepping out themselves. The culture around cheating in Japan is different. It's generally frowned upon if it's discovered, but there's also a level of tolerance for secrecy. People tend to look the other way as long as it's discreet. At this point, I work as an erotic massage therapist on the side, and a majority of my clients are married. I'd estimate that about 30 to 40% of them come with their husband's knowledge and even support. In fact, some of them get the money for these services directly from their husbands. Basically, here you go, have fun. Story 11. When I was younger, I met her at work. She was 10 years older than me and very flirtatious. One day, she asked me out for drinks after work. We never made it to the bar. We ended up hooking up in a parking lot instead. After that, every day we worked together, she'd ask about my lunch plans. She would take me in her car to get coffee she paid, then drive us to a drive-through place, think Sonic, and while we waited for the food, she'd give me oral. She also bought me food. On some weekends and after work, we'd hook up again. One day, she approached me about lunch but told me her husband would be meeting her. I think it was her way of warning me not to say anything, but I wasn't going to. After all, I was in my early 20s, and they had a kid. I wasn't looking to become a stepdad. Later, I saw the kid walk in with a guy who looked like Forrest Gump, leg braces and all. Turns out, the guy had cerebral palsy. I continued the arrangement for a while, but eventually the guilt got to me, and I had to stop. I know this might sound like some cool story, bro material, but it's true. I'm just an average guy, and I don't know what drew her to me, other than me, but it's never happened again. So who knows why it even occurred in the first place. Story 12. When I was 21 and in my first real job after university, my manager warned me that I'd attract a lot of attention from the women, mostly aged 40 plus. At the time, I didn't really get why, since I didn't think I was anything special. It wasn't until later that I realized she wasn't saying it because of my looks, but because many of these women were going through divorces or dealing with difficult marriages, and I was an easy target for them. Sure enough, she was right. I started receiving a lot of messages, including explicit pictures and very suggestive, aggressive ones. As a young guy, I didn't have the willpower or self-discipline to say no, so I indulged. What surprised me, though, was how vanilla most of these women were in the bedroom compared to women my own age. I assumed it was because many of them had been with one partner for so long, often married young, and didn't have as much experience or inclination to experiment. One woman even promised me a Chinese takeaway and a new iPad to come over. Story 13. I had something like a relationship with a married woman for about 3 months. I met her at a company party where I was taking photos. We hit it off instantly, and after the party, we hooked up in a car before heading to her hotel room. We ended up banging some more there in the hotel room, and at one point, a group of her coworkers came by to check on her. One of them said, "That doesn't look like your husband." After they left, we got back to what we were doing, but I stopped her to ask what that comment meant. She admitted she was married, but explained that she and her husband hadn't been intimate in 4 years. We agreed to keep seeing each other, and for the next 3 months, we spent most of our time together in bed, hooking up. It came to an end when I told her I was sick with the flu and couldn't see her. I never heard from her again. There were a few moments, particularly while we were in bed, when I imagined her husband walking in and catching us, thinking about how badly it could go down. That was the only time I felt any guilt. In the end, we both got what we needed, me intimacy without strings and her physical connection and validation. Sometimes I miss her. Story 14. I ended up being the other man in a relationship for about a year. At first, I truly believed her when she said she no longer loved her partner and was planning to leave him. She even told me she had already expressed this to him. I had just gotten out of a breakup, and here was this coworker in a relationship she claimed was loveless. So I thought, why not? Big mistake. We ended up cheating for a year, and in the end, it broke all 3 of our hearts. Looking back, it was one of the worst decisions I ever made. After a while, I started to realize she wasn't going to leave him, but by that time, I was already in love with her. I thought if I could prove to her that I was a better partner, she would leave him for me like she had said. But that didn't happen. After months of emotional turmoil, we both realized that she still loved him, and our affair was just a part of their complicated, toxic relationship. To make things even more complicated, we were co-workers. So, I ended up quitting my job because of the situation. Looking back, it was a wild chapter in my life, and I'm really glad it's behind me. I honestly wish them both the best. I've learned that I deserve someone who is fully committed to me, someone I don't have to win over or prove my worth to. She wasn't a good partner to either of us, so I hope she's learned and grown from the experience. Her partner wasn't innocent either, so hopefully, he's learned something from all of this as well. Story 15. He didn't celebrate her birthday for 3 whole years. He got her a card with absolutely nothing written inside, just the card, no real acknowledgement. In contrast, I went all out. I managed to rent out an entire restaurant during lunchtime, got the staff to sing happy birthday to her while we were on her lunch break, and surprised her with a cake. I took the time to remind her of how amazing she is. I simply cared enough to make her feel special, something he couldn't or wouldn't do. We kept up this dynamic for about a year. I treated her with respect and as an actual person, even though I wasn't in the best financial place myself. It wasn't about the money. It was about showing her that she deserved more than what she was getting. Eventually, she came to the realization that she needed to move back home to be closer to her family, especially since she had no real support system where she was. It took leaving and moving back to her home state for her to finally break free from that toxic relationship. I have no regrets about being the reality check she needed. Sometimes, you have to be the one to show someone their worth when they're stuck in a situation that's dragging them down. It was tough, but it was necessary. After that, she really turned her life around. She got focused, went to medical school, and now she has a son. Watching her grow and succeed after all that, knowing I played a part in helping her see what she deserved, was all the reward I needed. Story 16. I slept with my friend's mom once. It was a one-time mistake that I would never repeat, but it happened. We both enjoyed it, but she's still married to her husband. She was upset with him because of his work travel schedule. He's a professional bass player and instructor, and he had to be away every couple of weeks for a few days. I've always been close to my friend and his mom, and I felt terrible after it happened. I know I can never tell my friend about it, but sometimes it feels awkward when I go over to his house. She's always really friendly when I'm there, but somehow that just makes me feel worse. I definitely regret it, but it was a surprisingly sweet moment at the time. Story 17. In my late 30s, I spent about 2 years exclusively dating and having intimate connections with married women in ethically open relationships. While it's been a few years since the last time, I still occasionally find myself in similar situations. After my divorce, I wasn't ready to commit to anything serious right away, so I explained to the women I dated that I was just looking for something casual. However, my dating style, being deeply intimate, open, and emotionally connected in addition to physical intimacy, made it difficult to keep things purely casual. I find it hard to just engage physically without wanting to know people on a deeper level. As a result, I often ended up in situations where things got more serious than I intended. My dates became frustrated and confused because we were getting emotionally close, yet I wasn't ready to commit to exclusivity or a long-term relationship. To avoid that conflict, I decided to focus solely on dating married women in open relationships. I updated my dating profile and started connecting with people in polyamorous or ethically non-monogamous (ENM) communities, making it clear from the start that I was looking for a connection based on fun, intimacy, and deep conversations, without any expectation of long-term commitment or exclusivity. I wanted to be myself, enjoy amazing intimacy, and have meaningful connections with women who already had committed partners, houses, and families to return to. This approach worked really well for me. I had some incredibly fun and fulfilling intimate experiences, and I got to know people in ways that suited my needs. Some of the women I connected with were in happy marriages with active, intimate lives with their husbands, while others were in situations where their intimate life with their husbands wasn't fulfilling, but they had agreements to explore intimacy elsewhere. Both types of relationships offered their own unique dynamics. One where the energy was about insatiable desire and exploration with both partners, and the other where I played the role of someone fulfilling needs that weren't being met at home. Over time, my needs and preferences evolved, and I eventually opened up to dating single women again. Since then, I've experienced a range of relationship structures, occasionally reconnecting with married women in ethically non-monogamous relationships when the situation feels right. Story 18. It seems like some guys really have a particular interest in married women, almost as if they find it thrilling when a woman is willing to risk everything just to be with them. I have a friend who tends to only date or hook up with women who are married or in long-term relationships. At first, we would joke that it was just a strange preference, but after a while, it became clear that it was something more to him. I remember a woman I was friends with started seeing him behind her fiancé's back. Eventually, she left him for my friend, but as soon as she was no longer in a relationship, my friend completely lost interest in her. It was as if she wasn't appealing to him anymore once she was no longer tied down. Story 19. I've slept with 2 married women in my life, both of whom were co-workers, and both situations happened when I was in my 20s. The first was a drunken hookup when I was around 23. This was near the end of my drinking days. I'm 10 years sober now. The second situation was much more clear-headed. We worked closely together, which led to us talking more outside of work. One thing led to another, and we ended up sleeping together when her husband was out of town. She had told me that her marriage was going through a rough patch, so I didn't think it would be a big deal. I regretted it almost immediately and called it off after that one time. I felt like a real piece of shit. Needless to say, I don't sleep with married women or coworkers anymore. Story 20. She told me they were only staying together for the kids and were basically separated. She painted him as a controlling, terrible man and claimed they were free to see other people. I believed her, and we started hooking up regularly. Then one day, I got a call from her husband, a genuinely nice guy. He was worried about her and had heard rumors around town about us. We ended up having a long conversation, and I quickly realized she had lied. He wasn't the monster she made him out to be. In fact, he was a great guy. So we came up with a plan. I invited her out for drinks and let him know when and where. The moment she realized it was a setup, priceless. I was pissed that she dragged me into that mess, but in the end, it was worth it. Now, her ex-husband and I still keep in touch on social media. He's happily remarried to a much better woman, while his ex is still causing drama at the local bars. Story 21. I met a friend of a friend, and we hit it off. I ended up at her place, only to find out she was married. She assured me their relationship was basically over, that she had cheated before, and that she planned to ask for a divorce. A couple of years later, they're still together, and now they have a kid. I don't feel any regret for the husband, but I do wish I had known I was being lied to from the start. Story 22. Ironically, it's how I met my best friend. Me and this girl started a friend-with-benefit type relationship. I found out she was dating my friend, so I got his number from asking around and called him. I told him everything and he said, "I'll call you back." I thought he was going to kill me. Instead, she texted back, "You frigging jerk." And he called me and said, "Want to be my new friend?" And we've been brothers since. Story 23. There was this attractive girl at work who was engaged, and it turned out that she and her fiancé had made an unusual agreement. They each got one last hall pass before they tied the knot. She picked me as hers. So, while her fiancé was out of town at a friend's wedding, where he theoretically planned to hook up with one of the girls there, she came over to my house that Friday, and we ended up having an incredible time together. Meanwhile, her fiancé was busy trying to make his own moves at the wedding, but it turns out he didn't have as much luck as he thought. He struck out with the girl he had hoped to hook up with. Did I feel bad? Not at all. Story 24. I was fed the classic story. She's really toxic and abusive, and I'm trying to leave her anyway. I was honestly naive and completely fell for it because he made it sound so convincing. He seemed so sincere, so I believed him when he said things weren't working out. But when I got home, I checked Snapchat, and to my shock, he was posting all this lovey-dovey content with her. They were about to go on a road trip together, smiling and acting like nothing was wrong. I felt blindsided. I immediately confronted him about it, asking what was going on, and the next thing I knew, I was blocked on both his and her social media accounts. It was like I didn't exist anymore. I felt foolish and hurt, but the worst part was realizing the truth, that the whole "I'm leaving her" thing was just a lie. I can't help but feel bad for her now, hoping that somehow she found a way to escape the situation. And I've learned a tough lesson. Never, ever fall for the "I'm leaving them anyway" story. It's always a lie, and you're just being used. Story 25. Everyone's out here spilling their tea, so let me share mine. It's a long one, but I'll keep it short. I reconnected with an old high school girl who had a huge crush on me for years. I messaged her on Facebook, we went out to eat, and hit it off right away. I didn't know she had a boyfriend at the time, but she eventually told me. Still, I was persistent and took her back to my place. We got physical, and it didn't stop. Monday through Friday, we were spending time together, and things were hot and heavy. She had a birth control alarm on her phone to remind her to take her pill. She always left her purse in my car, not on purpose though. She was so into what we had going on that she was only seeing her boyfriend on weekends and me on weekdays. I started to fall for her, or at least I thought I was. This went on for about 6 to 8 months. Then one day, she texted me, saying we needed to talk. She told me she was pregnant. I thought I was the only one going without protection, but that wasn't the case. So, I took responsibility and accepted that I was going to be a father. She broke up with her boyfriend and moved in with me. We went through the pregnancy together, and when the baby came, the little one was as white as can be, with blonde hair and blue eyes. I'm brown-skinned with dark brown eyes and black hair. But I never doubted for a second that the baby was mine. About 4 months later, I saw a picture of the baby and thought, it kinda looks like him. But I didn't really think much of it. You know how love makes you blind. Fast forward a year and a half, and her ex-boyfriend texts her, asking for a paternity test because his new girlfriend thought the blonde baby looked like him. My girlfriend didn't want to take the test, but when he threatened to take her to court, she finally agreed. Sure enough, the test came back, and the baby was his. I took the loss, left both of them, and moved on. Things had already started going downhill when she began going MIA, not texting me for hours while she was with him and his kid. I went through her phone and found shady messages too. I felt like it was karma, but at least the father is still in the baby's life, and the baby seems happy, and that's all that matters. Now I'm just chilling, being single, and doing me. Oh, and before I forget, we went to court, got my name off the birth certificate, and changed the baby's last name. It was a wild ride, full of emotions, betrayal, and a lot of banging. A real-life story, by Ro, a broken man. Story 26. She found out her husband had cheated on her, and the excuses he gave were completely pathetic. So, I ended up being her way of getting back at him. I'll be honest, I did regret it a little because, frankly, she wasn't that great in bed. But when it came to the cheating, I couldn't care less. I didn't make any vows in their marriage, I wasn't the one who cheated with another girl, and I didn't try to weasel my way out of it with some lacklusting excuse. I knew she was married before we ever got involved, and I didn't try to hide that. It wasn't about me breaking up a marriage, it was about her seeking revenge, and I didn't mind playing my part in that. At the end of the day, I wasn't the one who caused the real betrayal. Story 27. I had this on-again, off-again fling with a woman for a couple of years. Sometimes she was single, sometimes she was back with her ex-boyfriend, who I think she ended up marrying. I knew all along that she was in a relationship, but the chemistry between us was so undeniable that it was hard to ignore. The bedroom activities were incredible, so passionate and intense. We just clicked in a way that made everything else feel secondary. Our bodies seemed to line up so perfectly, and every time we were together, the connection was pure fire. It was almost like we drove each other crazy with desire. Outside of the bedroom, there wasn't much else there, to be honest. We didn't really have a deep emotional connection, but the physical chemistry kept us coming back. Those moments were so unforgettable that, even now, I still think about them from time to time. To sum it up, we were both consenting adults, and there were no false expectations. So honestly, I don't feel bad about it at all. We got what we wanted, and it worked for a time. Story 28. I have no regrets about it at all. I was single, and he flirted with me, hit on me, and invited himself over. He made the first move, and I followed, as we were both incredibly attracted to each other, eventually ending up in bed together. I saw the whole situation as simple. I'm single, I haven't done anything wrong. I knew he was in a committed relationship, but like others have said, it's not my responsibility to manage someone else's relationship. If the person involved is okay with cheating, that's on them. I'm not responsible for their disloyalty to their partner. Story 29. The love of my life cheated on me with some guy she didn't care about, and it felt like it was just to hurt me. Life is messy when you're young and naive. If I could go back in time, I would do anything to keep her and be a better partner. I was often absent because of work, and while we agreed it would be okay, so we could save up for a bit. I know deep down she wasn't truly okay with it. She never said anything, but I could see it in her actions. I miss her so much. Later on, she was diagnosed with cancer. It's crazy how life works. Sometimes it feels completely unfair. Anything can happen, and you never know what's coming. It's a reminder to hold on tight to the people who truly love you and never let them go. Story 30. I was once the other man, and it was a messy situation. It was with a friend's wife, and I knew it wasn't right, but he treated her terribly. In a way, I think my presence helped keep the marriage going longer. I'd go over and do the housework he wouldn't, so in a strange way, he got free labor. She got emotional support and, yes, intimacy. For a while, it seemed to work, but eventually, the guilt weighed on her. She stopped the physical side of things, but still wanted emotional support and help around the house. Meanwhile, he didn't care much. He was more focused on his pot and in getting high. I tried to make the new arrangement work, but I wasn't happy with it. She kept hoping he would treat her better, but he was still stuck in his habits. Eventually, she and I had a falling out, and it was over. We slept together one last time after that, and not long after, he divorced her about a year later. There's more to the story, but that's the gist of it. The moral of this whole experience is simple. Don't get involved with people who are already in relationships. It never ends well for anyone involved. Story 31. This happened back in college. She had a boyfriend, and I knew about him. I felt bad for him, but honestly, I feel bad for anyone who gets cheated on. That said, I didn't feel personally responsible for what happened. I'm not anything special. It's not like she was completely faithful until she met me and suddenly couldn't resist. I didn't manipulate her or seduce her against her will. The truth is, she didn't want to be with him, but she was scared of being alone. So, she was essentially living a double life, enjoying the perks of being single while still having a boyfriend. She was going to sleep with someone, so I didn't see a reason to miss out. I wasn't the only guy she cheated with, either. I didn't know her boyfriend personally. He wasn't a friend or someone I was close to, and I didn't really care to learn much about him. I could have reached out to him and told him, but I didn't. From what I saw on Facebook, she eventually married someone else, but I think that ended in a divorce too. Story 32. There were a couple of times where I ended up in situations I didn't realize at the time. The first time, I met a girl, we hooked up, and it wasn't until later that I found out her boyfriend had been hanging out in the living room the whole time, not saying a word. The second time, I went to a grocery store where this girl worked as a cashier, and her boyfriend was the bagger. I came through with a bottle of rum, and she commented on how I must be having a good time. On the spot, I invited her to hang out the next weekend, totally unaware that her boyfriend was the bagger. We hung out for a few weekends, fooling around for about 3 weeks. Then one day, her boyfriend saw me at a bar and tried to start something. I told him I had no idea who he was, that she never mentioned him. His response was, "Oh, then I really gotta talk with her." So, we both apologized to each other, thinking everything was cool. Later, my buddy and I tried to buy some things from him online, and when my buddy mentioned my name, the guy said, "Oh, him, yes, screw him, he can pay 50% more." So, I just had another buddy order through him instead. Real class act, right? There was also another time when a girl tried to cheat with me after drinking, and I just had her crash on my couch instead of letting things go further. Lastly, there was another situation where I knew the girl had a boyfriend, so I simply turned her away at the door of my hotel room, told her to just go home. It's not worth getting involved in stuff like that. Story 33. I've been the other person before, sleeping with someone who was engaged. What makes it worse is that I actually knew her fiancé, and he was a good guy. We were drunk in college, and just being stupid. I felt absolutely awful about it afterward. Things took a turn for the worse when she accused me of manipulating her consent while she was drunk to save her relationship, a complete lie. She came on to me, and I wasn't the one pursuing her. She made up the story after her fiancé started questioning her behavior. I ended up having to defend myself in a students' union trial. Thankfully, I was able to prove my innocence by showing screenshots of WhatsApp chats from the morning after, where she admitted she regretted nothing and that it had been enjoyable. This was 20 hours later, so she clearly wasn't still drunk. It was a nightmare, but I eventually cleared my name. It wasn't worth it, not in the slightest. I've also been cheated on while in a relationship, and that experience was far worse. It really destroyed me. But looking back, I guess I deserved it, like they say karma. I've never cheated on someone while in a relationship, and honestly, I never want to know what it feels like. I'm not willing to mess around and find out. Story 34. I feel great about it, and I still do. Back in undergrad, I met a girl who came from a very strict Christian family. She had a boyfriend back home, someone her parents had vetted and expected her to marry. The only time she saw this guy was in group settings or during courtship dates with a chaperone. We started as friends, but it quickly became clear she wanted to rebel against that whole world. She wasn't ready to have that conversation with her parents yet, but we spent time together, and we ended up hooking up a couple of times. She's now an out lesbian, I'm a guy, and obviously didn't marry that guy or stay in her parents' cult. We're still friends today, and she's friends with my wife as well, who knows all about this. Honestly, I have no regrets at all. Story 35. I felt guilty about it, but I also managed to create a pretty elaborate rationalization for myself. I told myself something like, they're going to break up anyway, and this is my only chance before she moves to another country. He was a really nice guy, and I knew what I was doing was wrong, but at the time, my self-esteem was at its lowest, and I just didn't have the strength of character to make the right decision. That experience has given me a lot of perspective on people who cheat, lie, or act immorally. I've always considered myself a moral person, but now I realize that knowing what's right and actually having the internal strength to do it are two very different things. As soon as my self-esteem started to recover, I broke it off. I used to think of people as either good, moral, or unscrupulous. But now, when I see someone acting poorly, I tend to think it's because they don't have the internal support to be better or kinder. This has really helped me develop a much deeper sense of compassion for others. Story 36. No regrets at all. She had a boyfriend at the time, but it was more of a formality. They barely saw each other outside of the church youth group they both attended. You know, the kind of relationship you have when you're young just to say, I have a boyfriend at a different school. Anyway, a friend mentioned the boyfriend to me right before our first date, which threw me off a bit, so I didn't make a move that night. But on our second date, I went for it, she responded, and we kept seeing each other. Honestly, I don't think she ever officially broke up with the guy. She just stopped going to the youth group and stopped seeing him. I guess technically, they were still dating since they never had that conversation? I'm not sure, but either way, we've been married for over a decade now. So, yeah, I guess I've banged the F out of that guy's girlfriend, but from what I know, she hasn't heard from him since we started dating. I haven't thought about him in over 15 years, so I don't feel guilty about it at all. Story 37. We didn't technically sleep together, in the sense of doing it, but we did sleep next to each other a couple of times. There was this one time, though, after we woke up and were still cuddling, that a bit of playful biting turned into something more intimate. Before I knew it, I was on top of her, unsure whether I should take things further or not. I went for it. Though it wasn't exactly a kiss on the lips, it wasn't exactly not one either. Right after that, she sat up, and I did too. We both apologized immediately and honestly felt guilty about what had just happened. We both blamed ourselves, and I ended up being distant for a few days, feeling awful. But we eventually reconciled, since we were still really close friends despite that moment. A month later, she broke up with her boyfriend, but I never asked for the details of why or how that happened. We're no longer friends now, but for entirely different and more complicated reasons. That situation was the only time anything like that ever happened, and while I don't completely regret it for somewhat selfish reasons, I did feel terrible at the time. Story 38. I met a woman while walking back from a friend's wedding. She dropped her bag, and everything spilled out, so I helped her pick it up. After that, the flirting started, and we ended up after partying and talking more. Eventually, she mentioned that she had a kid and was still married to the child's father, which started to make me lose interest in pursuing anything further. But then she dropped a bombshell. She was having an affair with her married boss, and she was convinced he was going to leave his wife for her because they were truly in love. I didn't want to be the one to destroy a marriage, but honestly, the situation was already such a mess that I didn't really care anymore. The only thing I regret is that the banging wasn't great, and she kept asking me to go without protection. I've never been so focused on where a used rubber had been in my life. Story 39. I slept with a man who I knew was married. Before it happened, I made sure to give him multiple chances to back out and asked if he was sure about it because I didn't care about his wife at the time. I had no regret after it happened. Fast forward about 9 months. and they ended up splitting because I wasn't the only one he had cheated on her with. Plus, he treated her terribly emotionally. The wife and I started talking, and she wanted to become friends, but I couldn't do that without telling her what had happened. So I told her. At first, she laughed, but the next day, she told me she couldn't be friends with me anymore, and I understood. I still don't regret it. Story 40. I've read a lot of stories about regret, but my experience was completely different. A few years ago, I met a woman at work who was married with 2 kids. Over time, we connected, and I ended up at her place when her husband was away on business. Eventually, things progressed after I made the first move. I'm pretty sure nothing would have happened if I hadn't, although she didn't hesitate at all. We ended up seeing each other regularly for about 2 years, and it was great. Then, her husband switched jobs, and I got into a relationship, so naturally things faded out. We still see each other now and then, and while the physical intimacy isn't there anymore, we both look back on it fondly. She even thanked me a few times, saying that I helped her get through some tough times in her marriage by reigniting something in her. A few years later, her relationship is in another slump, so who knows where things will go. I also have to mention that after I got into a relationship, there were 2 or 3 times where things almost went further than they should have. But both of us knew it was different now. All in all, I'm glad it happened. She's a lifelong friend, and I have no regrets. Story 41. It felt incredible. She was so passionate, so eager. I was taking something that wasn't mine, and yet she was choosing me over who she was supposed to be with. I didn't feel regret or sympathy. She made her choice, and she chose me. She chose me because he had failed her, because he wasn't enough. It was a competition, and I came out on top, fair and square. Maybe if he had treated her better, maybe if he had been more charming, more kind, more attentive, she might have stayed loyal. But all I did was give her what she wanted, made her choice clear, and became the consequence of their decisions. It was a potent mix: power, ego, lust, the thrill of the forbidden, the victory, the chemistry. She was probably one of the best lovers I've had. Maybe it was wrong, but that was part of the allure. I feel nothing but nostalgia for it now. I'll always treasure what we shared and mourn what could have been, even though I know we only worked in a specific time, in a specific context. Still, she makes me wonder about parallel universes. Story 42. I'm 33 and gay, and I met a 46-year-old farmer on one of the hookup sites. We had an intimate relationship for almost a year, though it was long distance. I'd drive a couple of hours to see him a few times a month, and we texted often. We developed a strong, special bond. I fell deeply in love with him, but I had to navigate things on his terms since he was deeply closeted, living in a conservative town and industry. But the heart wants what it wants. In October, it ended abruptly, without a word. I later found out he had been married to a woman the whole time. There were some red flags I ignored, always justifying them because of his closeted situation. Now, in January, I'm still in deep heartache and working through the pain of moving on. I haven't spoken to him since a somewhat intense conversation in October, where I told him how I truly felt. I really hope time helps heal this so I can move forward. I just feel embarrassed. Had I known he was married, I never would have gotten involved. It's frustrating how many married to women, men are on hookup sites for gay men. It's disheartening to sift through all that. If you choose the wife and kids route, you're closing the door on being with men, or anyone else for that matter. You can't have it both ways. I hope he feels some guilt about what he did to me and to his wife. It wasn't right for either of us, and I hope something stirs in his heart about it. Story 43. I was under my ex's spell, and like an idiot, I let myself get caught up in an emotional affair after he started a long-distance relationship with the girl he cheated on me with and left me for. She's moving overseas to be with him. We ended up taking drugs together, and he cheated on his girlfriend with me physically. The physical affair lasted a month. The emotional part went on for 2 months. It was completely out of character for me and went against everything I stand for, and looking back, it was my lowest point. My messed up thinking made me want to prove to myself just how awful he was, especially after he started flirting with me on Instagram DMs after leaving me. But he took it as far as possible and showed me just how terrible he could be. It didn't make me feel any better, though, just more stupid. In a selfish way, though, it ended up being the wake-up call I needed. I saw through his manipulation, and I threatened him. If he ever contacted me again, I'd tell her everything, with screenshots as proof. He hasn't reached out since, and I haven't touched a drug since either. On one hand, I feel like scum for what I did, but on the other, I don't feel bad for her. She knew he was with me when they first started seeing each other. Plus, she's moving to our country soon and still has no idea what happened. Story 44. She told me she was leaving her emotionally abusive husband, that she was in the process of splitting up with him, but didn't know how to do it or how she would be able to support her kids without him. This went on for over 6 months, and during that time, I believed her completely. Like a fool, I opened up to her emotionally, offering support and comfort in any way I could. I thought I was helping her through a difficult time, genuinely believing she needed someone to lean on. What I didn't realize at the time was that it was all a lie. She had told the same story to multiple other guys over the years, that they were her soulmates, that she was stuck in an abusive relationship, and that she needed help to get out. It was a pattern of manipulation that I had fallen victim to without even knowing. It took me 5 long years to finally get over all the lies, the manipulation, and the emotional turmoil she had left me in. The cheating, the broken trust, the promises she never kept, it was a mess that I had to work through on my own. And even after all that time, it still stings to think about how deeply I was deceived. Story 45. A woman told me she was finalizing her divorce, so we started a strictly hookup relationship. 3 months went by, and I still hadn't heard any updates about her divorce. One day, I decided to look her up on Facebook, and to my surprise, she had just posted a family photo 3 days ago. I called her out on it, and she told me she was fixing her marriage. I was like, wait a minute, we just hooked up 2 days ago. I don't think you're doing much fixing. We met up one last time, and I told her that if she really wanted to fix her marriage, she needed to cut ties with me. If not, it wasn't about fixing anything. It was just about getting her needs met while pretending everything was fine. So, we ended things right then and there. Story 46. My ex, who left me for the guy she eventually married, is still with him years later, but clearly unhappy. I foolishly agreed to reconnect and be friends. One night, we were both out, and she ended up coming over to my place. We ended up sleeping together. She told me that it was her intention all along because her husband stopped paying her attention, and she missed the intimacy we once shared. She even suggested making it a regular thing. But I wasn't interested in being caught up in someone else's drama. I made it clear that we could still be friends, but that would never happen again. After that, we stopped talking when I started seeing someone else. And we just celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary this year, happily ever after here. It was a mistake, and I'm lucky it didn't lead to something far worse. Story 47. At the time, it felt exciting. Looking back, though, I realize I was emotionally manipulated by her. She had been unhappy in her marriage for years, practically abandoned by her husband because of his career. While she didn't lack anything material, there was no emotional connection or intimacy, especially when it came to talking about feelings or physical relations. She told me she wanted to be with me, and like an idiot, I fell for her deeply. But over time, her interest started to fade. She became too busy to see me, and there were always reasons why we couldn't meet. She promised me she'd see me tomorrow, but tomorrow never came. I spent so much time waiting for her to come through, and it was a waste. The last message I got from her was a simple "Good night, X," and I never responded to it. 6 months have passed, and I still think about her. Last night, I even dreamt that we were back in touch, only to wake up and find my phone empty. Would I sleep with another married woman? Probably. But now my emotions are locked away behind a wall, and I don't think I'll allow myself to fall so easily again. Story 48. She lied, claiming that their relationship was over, that they were living in separate rooms and just cohabiting. Unfortunately, it took me too long to realize that she didn't want to go out anywhere for fear of someone seeing her and telling her husband. At first, it made sense. I understood that financially, it's hard to leave a failing marriage, and splitting shared assets takes time, especially if the split is amicable. She convinced me it was on the level. Her husband wasn't home for long stretches, they had separate rooms, and all of that led me to believe she was being honest. In my case, he was just away for work training, and whenever he was back, that's when she'd be busy with friends or other commitments. But as time went on, it became clearer that she wasn't truly done with her relationship. The more I saw that, the more we fought. Eventually, it became too much for her because I refused to be just the guy she brought out when she was bored, while her husband was away. The stress became overwhelming for both of us. Story 49. I hooked up with a close friend who was engaged at the time, and I had a girlfriend. We had always been close. I knew her family, and her parents liked me. The day after, she handed me a letter, telling me that she had been in love with me for a while. I was absolutely dumbfounded, the operative word being dumb, and had no words. I had hidden feelings for her too, but I never thought anything would come of it. She decided it wouldn't work between us, and asked me to burn the letter right then and there. I told my girlfriend about it a few days later, and she forgave me. A few months later, we went to my friend's wedding. Fast forward a year, and my girlfriend cheated on me and left. The friend eventually got divorced, remarried, and stayed in touch with me over the years. Do I regret it? Yes, but not in the way you might think. Story 50. I got as close as you can without actually going through with it. I left a party, took a taxi, and offered to drop off a woman who was leaving at the same time. There was clear chemistry between us, and we were both pretty intoxicated, so it wasn't exactly innocent, but I didn't think much of it. At her place, she asked me to help her to her apartment, and being dumb, I agreed. I told the driver to wait outside, but he said I had to pay first, and once I did, he drove off. So, I go up to her apartment to get a glass of water and call a new taxi. Obviously, she didn't invite me there for water. She had other plans. Within seconds, I found myself with a very attractive woman sitting on my lap, bare, telling me that it's up to me what we do. Fast forward to a few of the most difficult and confusing minutes of my life. A phone call came in and saved me just in time. I had ordered 8 taxis through an app, and they called to warn me that they'd block my account if I kept it up. I immediately got up, thanked her, apologized for leading her on, though I had been clear all night that I was married. Told her she was extremely attractive, and that I'd probably carry an image of her in my head for the next 50 years. Then, I left as quickly as I could. There was no real risk of getting caught, but somehow, even that drunk, I had this inner feeling that living with the consequences of going through with it would be way too much to handle. So I left. I still regret it and feel enormous guilt years later. But I also feel relieved to know that in that moment, I had enough sense to stop before I hurt anyone, including myself. At the end of the day, you can tell everyone else whatever you want, but the mirror only shows you who you really are. Story 51. For those of you saying you're not responsible or don't owe anyone anything just because you're single, let me remind you of one thing: empathy. Participating in something that you know will ultimately hurt another person is just wrong. It's not just about your own desires. It's about considering the impact on someone else's life. And honestly, what kind of person are you to sleep with a liar and a cheater? Have some self-respect. I've had married men try to deceive me, and what really throws them off is when I actually try to talk about their issues and offer a chance to fix things. At the end of the day, you have a choice. And trust me, karma always finds its way back. I've also been on the other side of things, and I can tell you that every person I know who's slept with someone who's married or taken automatically loses respect in my eyes. Maybe you don't care about what other people think, but personally, I'd feel ashamed of myself. I'm not saying that situations are always black and white, but honestly, it takes so little effort to be a decent human being toward others. It's about treating people with kindness and respect, even when it's hard. Story 52. Nope, I didn't make any promises to that relationship. I've been the guy who's fully committed, and I've also been the other guy in situations like that. The only people to be upset with are the ones actually in the relationship. If all it takes is someone outside of your relationship batting their eyes and whispering some smooth words to make you cheat, then the problem isn't with the third party. It's with you. You're the one who allowed it to happen in the first place. Blaming the third party is just something weak people do when they don't want to face the fact that their partner just totally disrespected them. It's easier to point fingers at someone else than to deal with the betrayal from the person they're supposed to trust. But the reality is, if someone is willing to cheat, it's not about what someone else did. It's about the choices that were made within the relationship itself. Taking responsibility for that hurt is tough, but it's the only way to move forward. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.